Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and perfect. Now, the job of the director is one of the toughest on set because they have to work with everybody in the production. The actors, the writers, sound designers, editors, the list goes on and on and on. And this person has to hold everything together. Now, today we're going to meet some wonderful directors who have been nominated at the National Youth Film Awards 2020. Why don't you tell us about your film?
So, Lady's Wedding Revenge Plan is a story of a teenage girl who is kind of terrified of growing up and facing the many, many emotions that she has. And so, in a race to try and salvage that part of her life, she decides to kind of try and ruin her older sister's wedding.
The words are so scary, like revenge and ruin, but actually when you watch the film, it's so fun.
Yeah. It's actually more comedic than you would think.
Yeah.
It's a short film about elderly lady who lives alone in Sin Ming Avenue, one of the very few estates in Singapore where there's wild chickens roaming around. And so one day in 2017, she saw the authorities coming to catch the chickens, and having a very strong bond with the chicken, right? She decides to catch every single chicken that she can and put it in her tiny little HDB flat. When you see something so wild like a chicken putting in a place so compartmentalized and orderly like a HDB flat, there is bound to be chaos.
Yeah, when you say wild chickens, not just one, multiple.
Yeah.
In an HDB flat, oh my god, so chaotic.
Yeah, about 4 of them are roosters and the rest are hens. And during the set, we are just trying to stop them from fighting against each other. They're just crowing non-stop and pooping everywhere and laying eggs. So I remember that I shot for 3 days.
They were laying eggs?
When I shot for 3 days and they laid a total of 8 eggs.
What do you do with them? Do you cook them?
No, we have to, so whenever they hatch, right, the egg will be warm and then we'll just like to hold it and then we'll just go around and then we'll put it somewhere. Then eventually we will eat it lah.
I offer you a nice egg in this trying time.
No waste.
The Believers is a documentary film about non-secular and secular rituals. So it ranges from scenes of Thaipusam all the way to horse racing, to sort of talk about the beliefs that we have in a very wide way of putting it.
I remember when I first saw the horse racing one appear, I was like, what's happening here? What religion is this? They were super into it, and it took me a while to clock that they were at the horse races because you didn't show any horses at all. It was just a bunch of people around with paper. It could have been anything.
It's a form of voyeurism in some ways, but yeah. So you only get what it is, perhaps as to what you said, halfway through the clip.
Some of the shots, they kind of matched in the way they were framed.
There was a deliberate intention to kind of frame it in a certain way to kind of create a connection between the scenarios, and I get that even more in the second viewing. So yeah, I just thought that I can feel that, in that same space, people do partake in activities that, like what you said, they believe maybe in something, whether is it real or not.
Yeah, I try to keep it, because I am the director, the DP, the editor, and whatever.
Who is it?
All in one.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of what I intended for, but it's cool because there's no narration. So what happens is that you kind of have to collide the worlds only by aesthetics and framing.
My documentary film is about Agwan, a 57-year-old IT illiterate man who, for the first time in his life, is mustering up the courage to physically hunt for a wife. So how he does this is that he carries around a signboard that says, "Honest man needs a wife, age, look, race, okay, but must have nice back." So we kind of follow him on his romantic journey.
So to elaborate, nice back is actually is like a euphemism for
nice booty.
Nice booty.
Yeah, he's a product of his time. So I think back then women need to dress nicely and stuff like that. To him, this is just common knowledge. But to us right now, it's different. We live in different times. So it's very interesting to explore his way of thinking, because I'm obviously very, I'm all for feminism. I don't really want to show just how I think he objectifies women, because I think it's a result of probably his teachings and the way he grew up and stuff like that also. So it's we have to understand people that we don't agree with also.
I realized that this uncle was doing what he was doing because like it was his last shot in love, right? And I kind of like sympathize with him in that way because like I mean everybody is looking for love in some way. He said it's a blessing to be loved, better than giving someone your love, but eventually I will have to give in and become the person who gives love. He's doing this because like he really couldn't find anyone to be his partner for like when he was younger, and this is like, you know, he has to do it just because it's his last shot.
I think what came across also quite clearly for me is that you didn't judge him as a person, so it wasn't like he was a predator, but you also very fairly showed like some of his behavior was quite predatory.
Oh.
Do you know because there were women who he was trailing at the market who would run away from him because they didn't feel safe. Because he would see a nice butt and then he would follow them, right?
It's like straight up stalking.
That's straight up stalking.
Like,
yeah. So that was like predatory behavior, but you didn't necessarily frame him as a predator. And yeah, that was interesting.
Okay, my intention for the theme of the documentary was to kind of explore how, like, if you were self-aware of your flaws or the things that you do and you know that it's bad, like, is that enough? Is it enough to know, to just know? You know? It doesn't mean that you're not a good person or a bad person, you know. You cannot, sometimes things are not so black and white. Yes, he's this person, but he's also lonely and he's also like insecure. He's a lot of things, you know. And I wanted to show that.
We are all searching for love. So I think that's the romantic part of it. And
Right.
that's the thing that gets by, you know, that's the thing that we can forgive him for. But everybody has different approach when it comes to finding love. So like, you know, some like now dating apps are so common, and I don't think that has become sort of like a stigma anymore.
So which part of yourself did you inject into the protagonist?
If you notice the voiceover, right, is all those voiceover, I actually took it from my diary when I was 16 years old. And so in that way it's like super personal lor. And I actually kind of felt like I went through like a learning journey with myself, a learning journey along with the character of Eloise, because in the film Eloise is also like coming to terms with like letting go of things that she needs to move on from, like maybe like her sister and being a kid.
Since you talked about the diary sort of being the anchor point, was that also your initial inspiration?
The first inspiration that I got to write this film was actually damn random. It was like I was just walking downstairs at my house, then I saw this little girl with like wearing bunny ears, and she was just like some tomboy, like a little tomboy girl wearing bunny ears, and like she just doesn't give a shit what everyone thinks. And I think that was like my first inspiration for Eloise.
What I noticed about this film that was really interesting is that like there's a lot of actually wide shots and close-ups, but how did you manage to get so close to some of the rituals?
It's interesting that a lot of people are sort of willing to let me in into their very intimate spaces, or but it's also a result of time that I might have spent with them for like a really long time. Or either that I'm being linked from someone that they trust already, so then they're like, okay, this guy seems credible enough, I guess. You become a very intricate part of these practices, and sort of you become part of their family, especially for some of these places where you start to follow for close to a year or maybe a year and a half.
Okay, so when I watched your film, right, it was very straightforward. It's very heartwarming and kind of sad also. But I wanted to know, did you actually plan for the protagonist to have any sort of emotional connections to the chicken?
Xingming, firstly, right, Xingming estate is not a young estate. It's quite an old estate. I've been living there for 30 plus years already. So there are actually a lot of elderly who are there. And these old people, right, sometimes I come back from work, I see them feeding the chickens. There's some kind of bond between the chickens and them. In my story, I decided to make her living alone was also trying to amplify the contrast between her loneliness and her love for companionship with the chicken. And so at the beginning, you know, you see her feeding the chickens. That is the only sort of companionship she has. Those are her neighbors. Those chickens are her neighbors.
What would be a word that you would use to describe your work or the work that you want to do in the future?
If I had to choose one word to describe my work, I think it would be to feel. So in that sense, I feel like my film Lady E was a very big manifestation of my goal to make people feel, because basically the film was about emotions, right?
Expanding beyond the self, sort of trying to look past your own judgments, trying to look past anything that society kind of feeds you, and really sort of try to empathize with everything, but at the same time still have a sense of what might be right or what might be wrong.
Dissatisfaction from the norm, really just a take on the situation that's around us. I don't necessarily want to give a stand or an answer to how I think things would be better, but I think more importantly is trying to raise questions.
My work would probably have to be comedy, because like for me, I think in everything like sad or like chaotic, I think there's always an element of comedy, like something that we can laugh at. Because when we laugh at something, it's easier for us to kind of come into acceptance and relate it to ourselves.
Thank you so much, guys. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us, and congratulations again on your nominations. We will see you at the awards. In the meantime, take care and bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.